We're here at Brent Michael Davids' house on the Mohican Reservation up in northeast Wisconsin. And we're here to talk with Brent this morning a little bit about the project that we're doing with Northern Illinois University for the fall of 2014. I'm going to ask Brent a few questions about the project, and he will respond and with his ideas. Brent, tell me a little bit about this idea that you had for this flute concerto and what we want to accomplish with all of this.
Well, I have two responses. One is directly to the question. So if for the inspiration, the original idea for this piece, the germ of the idea, comes from traditional native flute music. There's for wood flutes were solo instruments usually. And the old way of making a flute, like the flute player, went out and made their own flutes. So they weren't like factory made, or somebody in the community who's a great flute maker might make a bunch of flutes for people. But to do it the old way, the real way, you had to go make your own flute. So it was really yours. And then there's no standard pitch reference for American Indian music. There's no like A440. The flutes had all sorts of different tonalities. And however your fingers rested on the flute, like if you're carving out your flute and hollowing it and all that, however your fingers felt comfortable on the flute, that's where you put the holes. So we don't really know what the tuning could be anything, because it depends so much on, the inner diameter of the flute, like how wide the inner diameter is and how far the holes are placed apart, to get the different tunings. But so you had individual flutes, and they were meant as solo instruments. They weren't played in an ensemble at all. And you could tell, like in courting, the courtship flutes, they were for courting, really, and people would make flutes and then go court with them. But that when, a woman could tell which flute songs she liked, and which, you could tell from the personality of the flutes and who it was that was around, that was courting. So that's where the idea came from. If we're going to write a flute concerto, we've got this tradition of courting flutes. And I thought it would be really fun and funny to have a concerto where the flute soloist is actually being courted or courting back, so having interactions going on between the soloist and the orchestra in different ways. And it could be flirty, and it could be jealousies could erupt. I was thinking, if the flute and the tuba are having this little interchange, then maybe the trumpet gets a little jealous and starts interrupting somehow, and then maybe a whole big brawl could go out, like a bar fight almost in the orchestra at some point. And then I came up with the idea of calling it fluting around, because it really is it's a pun, but it's also funny because it really does draw on like native traditions of courting flutes, but taking it into a Western hall, an orchestral hall, and doing something different with the orchestra. So that's the basic idea. The other response to that question is that I purposely try not to taint myself with too many ideas. Like in one sense, I can always come up with new ideas. Like any good composer can create a composition. So that's kind of a given. But is all the music the composer's creating good? And I would say no. There are some really meaningful pieces that come out, but there's something unique about them. There's something different. There's something interesting about them that makes you just go, wow. Like, oh, I never heard that before, or I never heard that in that way before. And those are the ones that we really remember, So the piece has to be more meaningful. And a lot of times it has a meaning beyond the music. So it's not just like a picture hanging over the back of your couch kind of art. You know, it's got something that touches you in another way. It has meaning that is relative to your life. You know, maybe it speaks to some kind of politics going at the time, and maybe it doesn't. Maybe it just speaks to some cultural situation that's going on. But it has an extra musical component about it if it's a really great piece. And those are the ones that I like to try and write. But I also like to try and not taint myself to it. You know, so on one hand, there's always another idea. You know, if that idea doesn't work out, there's more where that came from. You know, that sort of thing. But also, I don't want to nail myself down too much. So here we are. This is the very first thing. You know, not a note has been written, and we're just talking about the ideas and exploring some options. So it's better just to sort of stay free and loose with the idea, you know, not nail yourself down to any one thing, and because something more interesting might come along. So, you know, what if it's like, you know, weeks from now, and we're like, okay, we're going to do this and this and this and this and this, and then all of a sudden this beautiful idea comes, and it's like, whoa, and we'll have to throw everything out, you know, start all over.
Yeah.
But we have to, I think, leave it open to that until we're really certain, you know, and then showtime is in like another few weeks, so we got to crank this out and get it done. So that's kind of my approach to it. So other than the initial idea, I don't have any other ideas. I've sort of left it open for exploring, and it'd be great though to use like a bunch of different instruments and different kinds of it'd be fun to sort of play with Western ideas of music as well. There's this the idea of being in a concert hall. It's sort of it has the facade of being one-way communication, like from the stage to the audience. And there's this idea of the sound of the music being the philosophy that you're supposed to appreciate. So you can almost go to the concert hall and sit in the audience and look at the stage and close your eyes even and just listen to the sound coming at you from the stage, you know, and then it's done and you applaud, you know. But for native music, it's much more mixed up. Like you know, if you go to a powwow, for instance, you can't even tell who's a performer and who isn't sometimes. People will be dancing, they'll be singing, then they'll be sitting next to you on a bench eating something, then they're in a minute, they're a flash, they're out there dancing again. And you don't even know who's in audience and who isn't. And people are eating and they're talking, you know, and sometimes, you know, ceremonial things might be going on at a powwow, and then everyone's hats come off and they're paying attention. Then everything's like back to eating and talking again, and stuff is just happening every which direction. And unlike an orchestra, like you look at an orchestra and it's like everyone's dressed in black, you know, almost like the old religious gowns and choruses, and, you know, everything's uniformed. And I think that's intended so you don't see the individuality of the people. You know, you're not supposed to notice the trombone player emptying their spit valve, or the clarinetist popping their horn apart and running a rag through it in between the movements, you know, and then starting again. You're supposed to sort of not see those things, even though you do see them. And that's what I mean, is that it's kind of a facade. Because everything that goes on at a powwow, the eating, the food, the rustling, people dressed in all sorts of vibrant colors and feathers, and, you know, they are noticed as individuals at a powwow, where you're not supposed to be in an orchestra hall. So, but I think the same is true. The same dynamics actually exist in a concert hall. They're just downplayed. So you're not supposed to be as much of an individual, you know, or get noticed. So I think those kind of things can actually be played with in the composition too. So it might be possible to bring more a native way of approaching music into the concert hall and mix it up a little bit more.
What are your feelings about coming back to Northern Illinois University?
Oh, that's a good question. I loved being at Northern. I really did. I just learned so much. You know, I came to Northern as a music education major my first semester because I had no idea. I had already started composing in high school. I took music theory in high school. and wrote a couple of pieces there, and then came to NIU as an education major. But then I found out immediately within the first semester that you could study privately with a composer, one-on-one. You know, like I had already heard of that, like you take piano lessons, it's just you and the piano teacher sitting at a piano. But I had no idea about that with composers. And I was like, I was just drawn to it right away. And then I found out you could actually switch majors. So I was like, I'm going to switch and become a composition major. So I did. So there's only one semester in my whole career that I was in music education. And after that, I was a comp major all the way through my degree. And I don't know what else to say about that. But I love being there. And it's going to be really interesting to go back and see everything. I've heard there's a great new concert hall. And I also stayed in Gilbert Hall the entire time. You know, some people, they stay in the dorm for maybe the first semester or the first year. There might have even been a requirement back then that every student had to be in the dorm for a year or something before they could move off campus. I don't remember, but I decided to just stay. It's easier in some sense because you don't have as much stuff to take care of and no house and no yard and stuff. Plus, you don't have to cook because you can go down and eat, you know, and people are cooking for you. So I just found it to be more convenient, and then I could focus my time on other things. But and you're right across the street from the music building. But you know, so that was interesting. But I know they closed the dormitory, Gilbert Hall, sometime after that in the 80s, maybe, or the 90s, 80s. They turned it into office space and whatnot. So it wasn't actually a dorm anymore. But they're revamping it now and turning it back into a dorm, which I think is great. So that'll be interesting to see because I think I went back in the mid-90s to campus and you couldn't get into that Gilbert Hall anymore. It was all locked up and everything. But this next time, I want to go back there and go walking through there again.
I know.
And see the different... It was really a fun time. There were nursing students in that hall too because the back side of the hall faced the nursing programs in the nursing building. And then we also had art students in there and they were across the street from the art building. So it was like an interesting mix of people in there. Artists and musicians and composers and nurses. And what's funny too is that I don't know if this is true or not for other campuses, but you know the little tassels that you get when graduation, nursing and music are the same color. They're kind of pink.
Perhaps there's a purpose.
Like, did they put all the pink people in Gilbert Hall?
Well, thanks, Brent, and I'm really looking forward to this, and this is going to be quite the journey, and it's really the journey sometimes that I find to be the most unique and rewarding part of the whole venture. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks.